Welcome to this event, which is, as you've seen, part of the Forestry Technical Network, which means that we're actually recording it, so be careful what you say, so that we can also share it with our colleagues outside of Rome. We're trying to link them up. We've had a few technical problems with our Skype this morning, but if not, then at least we will have a recording that we can share with them. But we're hoping that they will be linked in so they can also send some questions to us and participate in the discussions. Today we would look at socioeconomic surveys in forestry. And why are we doing that? Well, we all know that forestry and forest are about more than just trees. It's also about people. And we also know that we have very scant information at the global level when it comes to how many people are dependent on forest, what's their dependency like, what are the benefits that they're obtaining from forest. So we would like to get some better information on that. And the purpose of the discussion here this morning is to look at what are some of the tools that we have to undertake socioeconomic surveys related to forests. So I have a great panel with me here today. I will just give a quick introduction to all of them. I will unfortunately have to leave because I'm traveling tomorrow morning to the EU to discuss, among other things, socioeconomic surveys in forestry. So we will see how that goes. But I'd like to just present who we have here with us today, and going on my right, to the left for you. Ilya Zanimon is a forestry officer here in the department and has been working a lot on national socioeconomic surveys in forestry, has been preparing some guidelines for FAO together with other organizations on how we do that. And he will present some of that today to you all. The second presenter that we have here is Michael Austin Rahija, who's a statistician working in the office of the chief statistician here at FAO. He has also been working on the global strategy to improve agricultural and rural statistics and the agricultural and rural integrated surveys project. So looking at seeing how we can actually incorporate some of the forest-related indicators and questions into other surveys as well. He's been providing technical assistance to countries in East Africa and Latin America as well to implement agricultural surveys. So it's some practical experience in how that works in the field. The third one here is Serena Ferrari. She's also working with FAO, but in what we call the Pastoralist Knowledge Hub. So she's been working particularly in West Africa on livestock issues, and currently works on projects with pastoralist organizations, looking at how to build their capacity and empowerment as well. Next to her, we have Rebecca Tavani, who's a forestry officer as well, working in the forestry department, and has been working for many years on support to national forest inventories, national forest assessments, and also to our program on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Has been working, for example, as lead technical officer of national forest monitoring projects in Uganda and Ethiopia. So again, bringing some of the experience from the field back to us to see how we can help scale that up and provide some guidelines on going forward on these kinds of survey. And last but certainly not least, Alberto Zacca, who is a senior economist in the development data group of the World Bank, where he's working with the Living Standards Measurement Study team, looking at how we can improve the availability and quality of data in household surveys. He also used to work for FAO. So we have a strong team from across the various departments here in the FAO, and we're really looking forward to their presentations and to your questions and comments and experiences, so we can help share the knowledge that we have on socioeconomic surveys in forests. I will unfortunately have to leave you before we hear all the presentations to prepare for the mission tomorrow and for the climate cut that I'm going to be in actually the day after tomorrow. But Dawe has kindly agreed to step in. He's also the one who's been organizing these technical sessions that we have. So he will help with the question and answer session that we have here today. But I will just hand over to Ilyas.
Good morning everybody. My name is Ilyas Ayman. I'm working in the Forest Governance and Economics team. And today I'm going to share some of the thoughts on socio-economic surveys in forestry. So in 2010 there was an interesting article in Economics saying that data everywhere. Basically saying how the kind of data explosion from kind of scarce to super abundant, and ever since it has become super abundant. But that is true for many data sets, but unfortunately it's not true for the socio-economic data related to forestry, which is a kind of key puzzle, a key data that we need to measure sustainability. And if we cannot measure, we cannot manage. So that is a key issue. So what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is to explain why we are promoting the National Socio-Economic Surveys in Forestry, and what is the coverage of the forestry modules that we developed, and in which context it is being implemented, and what are some of the ways forward. So starting with this why question, and we know that the data in forestry has been collected through different surveys. So let me introduce a few surveys. Like the agriculture census is one where we start from there actually. This is what FAO is kind of technically helping countries to collect the data, but unfortunately we don't have many forestry variables in the agriculture census, but it is intended to generate internationally comparable data on agriculture. And then we have our own national forest inventories that which Rebecca will be presenting a bit more detail later. And this is done by mostly by recent surveys have been done under this National Forest Monitoring and Assessment and FAO Finland program, and has been done in several countries. Unfortunately, in some data sets, they are not necessarily nationally representative. And then there are a series of other surveys. For example, the Poverty Forest Linkage Toolkit, the IUCN has done that in 23 countries. Surveys were done as part of that. And then the surveys that own socio-economic and institutional data for collecting socio-economic and institutional data under this International Forest Resources and Institution Research. And then most of you will be familiar with the data that was collected under this Poverty Environment Network, which was led by C4, which was a consistent methodology for measuring the multiple contributions of forest and non-agricultural lands in household income. And it was done in over 50 sites in 24 countries, but again, the data collected were not representative of the national population. So what I have been trying to say is that, we see a lot of surveys. The problem is that, aggregating, disaggregating, and even comparing the data coming from different sources is really sometimes problematic. It's very difficult. And also, as I said before, the coverage of the forestry variables in these kind of surveys are rather limited. And some of the data sets don't represent the national population, so again, that's a problem. But there are a series of surveys which Alberto is here from the Living Standard Measurement Study Group, which they have been doing is to promote these kind of surveys to collect data on household living standards in developing countries. And we looked at the coverage of the forestry in these surveys, and there is an offshoot of the LSMS, these integrated surveys in agriculture, for strengthening the agricultural data. But then the forestry variables in these surveys were limited too. So that was a kind of thinking, like why can we produce some modules to integrate in these LSM type surveys? And why? Because we know for sure, we have published evidence that in many places the contribution of forest to household income is almost equal as the contribution from crops. So we have evidences now, and the point is like, are we really trying to generate more socio-economic data related to forestry? And also we had recent publications, the State of the World's Forest 2014 and recently State of the World's Forest 2018, covered a lot of data related to socio-economic benefits, which actually tells the scale of the benefits that people receive. For example, in the SOFA 2014, we had interesting estimates actually from the available data. For example, forest products contribute to 1.3 billion people's shelter, and also 2.4 billion people cook with wood fuel. But then in the same SOFO and also in SOFO 2018, we have been struggling to find the data, reliable data on the socio-economic aspects. And the challenge is that it has got consequences in directing policies and investment measures, and also it affects the visibility of the sector as a whole. Apart from that, we all know that we shouldn't leave no one behind. But then how we know that we are leaving people behind or not without understanding how these benefits are distributed among different groups of people. And we had an interesting workshop a couple of weeks ago here in FAO about these global forest goals, and particularly global forest goal 2, which is talking about enhancing the socio-economic benefits from forest. The main discussion was how we can measure or we can report this without having reliable data. And this is true for sustainable development goals, especially 1 and 2, and also many criteria indicator processes which talks about socio-economic functions of forests, and the national and subnational targets and social safeguards, and several coming initiatives like the UN Decade of Family Farming. So for all these purposes, we need more data, quality data. And that was the thinking that led to the development of the modules for National Socio-Economic Surveys in Forestry. Originally, we aimed to produce these 4 living standard measurement study type surveys, but as I will explain later, it has been applied in different other contexts too. So this was a good collaboration, an excellent work done in collaboration with different institutions like C4, UFRI, and then the Living Standard Measurement Study Group and Pro4 of the World Bank. So the purpose of these modules is to assess the contributions of forests and trees in household welfare and livelihoods. And these modules were pilot tested in 3 countries, Nepal, Tanzania, and Indonesia. And this was published as a forestry paper, which is available online, and the English and Spanish versions are available online as well, and the French version will be available very soon. So let me explain, briefly introduce what is the coverage of these modules. So every module, the forestry modules can be implemented at community level and also at household level. And for every household level and community level, there are standard community questionnaire or standard questionnaire and extended questionnaire. The standard questionnaire is, we thought, is very important, and then the extended is optional. But that was our thinking. The users are free to take any module because we followed a modular approach in such a way that people who are interested in specific aspects can pick up the modules and implement it. So the standard community questionnaire it has got questions on seasonal calendar, the modules on most important forest and wild products, and then the units and pricing, and then community benefits. That means what are the benefits that communities receive from different management practices, their participation, what's the level of support they get, and then what are the governance arrangements, especially forest institutions, and the enforcement and penalties. And the extended community questionnaire is covering the community environmental services, basically looking at what are the perceptions of communities in terms of climate change. And in the household questionnaire, it starts with an income module, which is pretty detailed, like what is the income that is derived from forest and wild products, and also it looks into what are the other forest-related income sources, including the payment for environmental services programs. And then there are modules on forest resources, which is basically looking at what is a forest resource base, and forest and energy, particularly on fuel wood and charcoal, and then forest and health, and then forest and construction, and also the modules on food shortage and shocks and crises. So basically how the forest and trees are trying to help the communities during these phases. And the extended household questionnaire has got questions on forest changes and forest clearance. So in which context these modules have been implemented? The World Bank has been trying to implement it in different countries, and I'll give an example of Turkey, where it was implemented at national level, and then the adapted modules we have been trying to implement that in the National Forest Inventory in Bangladesh, and the selected modules from especially the income module has been, we are trying to implement that in Trinidad and Tobago, that is at the project level, and in Tunisia, most likely, these modules will be integrated into the forest inventory or agricultural census. So in Turkey, it was the survey resulted in good results actually, and that led to evidence-based policy recommendations, and also it fed into policy relevant documents, example the Forest Policy Note and also Turkey's Forest Strategic Plan. And what we have been trying to do in recent years is to really integrate these modules into the national forest inventories, because from the inventory we collect a lot of biophysical data. How best we can integrate this with the socio-economic aspects to answer some questions related to sustainability. And in Bangladesh, the surveys were done in 5 zones, and we have been trying to do kind of post-stratification, I call it, because like when we collect the data, we also should think beforehand in which level it can be reported. We collect at forest division level, maybe we try to, if you think ahead, maybe we can report at the district level. So basically we add value to that kind of data sets. But of course, like any other survey, there are challenges and there are complexities in this, especially the diversity of the products, where we draw the line. There are hundreds of products, so at the kind of national level survey, maybe we may miss out a lot of the products. So, and then lack of definitional clarity, especially what people perceive as a forest product. So that could be another problem. And then the informal transactions, it's very difficult to collect even sensitive data, and also the informal, the transactions happening informally just by one-off surveys. And then there are issues with the seasonality, that means the seasonal products, and then how we design it, how we design the record period for these surveys. And then one of the big challenges that is how we prioritize the information needs, because the information needs sometimes could be long, very long, and then we have been trying to maybe having an analytical framework to just prioritize what are our information needs. And also we have been trying to foster partnerships, because this should be a continuous process than just taking one at a time data. So what we have been trying to do is to foster partnerships with the national forest departments, national statistical offices, and even national agriculture departments as in Tunisia. So another thing is about the flexibility. I told about maybe we miss some information, some products we may miss in the national level survey. Maybe in national forest inventories we should have the provision, apart from the community survey, apart from the household survey, we go to specific groups, which may be honey or any other product, specific user groups. Or maybe we find some issues in the national forest inventory, we should have the provision to go back and collect the information to find what's happening there. So also we could think of one component informing each other, especially like if you can think about the seasonal calendar I mentioned. Maybe we can use we can design the questionnaire and also the timing of the survey based on that. But again, in the national scale surveys, it could be challenging. So in any case, what I'm trying to say here is that when we go to the country, sometimes the first question is, where is the questionnaire? So at least we have a questionnaire now, so there is no need to reinvent it. What we need to do is to adapt the questionnaire, adapt these forestry modules to the local context, and also building on the existing data sources and building on the expertise within the country, and also designing the surveys based on the lessons learned. So this is where I think we all should work together, because the point is like how we can make this process more efficient. So first thing is, like we compile the data for every publication and we leave it there. So instead, what we are trying to do now is to, especially compiling these data sets at the national level and then making its best use. Because most of the time that also happens out of the survey, we just leave the data there without using it. So that will tell us where are the actual data gaps. And based on that, we can integrate these modules in upcoming surveys. So the other thing is like what are the lessons learned from these national forest inventories to make that process more efficient, or any other survey. So we are also trying to find out what are the lessons learned. This is an upcoming work that we are doing. And then, how to build the capacity of the national statistical officers and other survey implementers. So in this context, we are developing 4 e-learning courses which will be released very soon. And eventually, as I said, the data is so scattered in different places, and data has been collected for different purposes. If we have kind of a place where we can, put all these data sets, that will really help us when we design the surveys, and also having an expert network to broaden the evidence base and basically how we can use the available data in a better way. And so my take-home message is that we have the modules here, and then we have the guidance in the Forestry paper 179. So let's try to generate more forestry relevant socioeconomic data. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. As was mentioned in the introduction, my name is Michael Rahia, and I'm a statistician with the Office of Chief Statistician. I was invited to come give a presentation on this software called Survey Solutions because up until recently I was working in the global strategy to improve agricultural statistics, where I was coordinating technical assistance related to computer-assisted personal interviewing, as well as in the Agri-Surveys project, where we were using Survey Solutions to implement the Agri-Survey in Latin American countries. So the first thing I would like to do is give a little bit of background, and then about the software and how it's developed, and what some of the key features are, and what makes it advantageous compared to other similar products. Then I would like to show you what the 4 main pieces of the software are and how they interact with one another, and how this is useful for data collection. And then at the end of the presentation, I would like to give you a sense of the look and feel of the tool by showing some screenshots of each of the 4 pieces. So first of all, you should know that that Survey Solutions was developed by the World Bank. As a result of a study they commissioned in 2011, it was found that of the CAPI softwares on the market at the time, none of them had all of the key features and were freely available that NSOs needed to adopt CAPI software. So many of them had, some were free but perhaps weren't user-friendly. Others, for example, lacked some key features like case management and so on. And so the World Bank took the results of these studies, and their ambition was to design and build a CAPI software that would meet all of these different criteria, and that would be easy to use enough for national statistical offices to adapt and implement. So in 2002, with the beginning of the research agenda for the global strategy made a large investment in developing this tool with the World Bank to get it off the ground. So since 2011, Survey Solutions has been used for surveys all over the world in around 108 countries for more than 6.5 million interviews. FAO has provided assistance in 14 countries for various types of surveys, including agricultural surveys as well as household surveys, as well as, for example, a randomized control trial as well in AGAL with livestock extension officers. And also in the Office of Chief Statistician, we use Survey Solutions to implement some of the corporate outcome assessment survey, as well as the recent FAO Site User Satisfaction Survey, as well as the Quality Assessment and Planning Survey. So at corporate level, we're using Survey Solutions a lot, not really so much for CAPI surveys, but also for the web interviewing features. It's also used by the Living Standards Measurement Study, as well as AGRIS, as I already mentioned. So here's a brief comparison to some of the other more well-known products that are on the market. CS Pro is perhaps the oldest and most used CAPI product. In respect to CS Pro, Survey Solutions is much easier to use. It's also free, but it has a much shallower learning curve. It doesn't use a complicated programming language that you have to become proficient with in order to design a survey. So the survey development time is much shorter. Also, there's much less training required, and this was a key constraint for the adoption of CS Pro in countries, because essentially you would train somebody in a national statistical office to use the software, and then they would leave, and then the capacity would be gone, and they would, in most cases, have to hire expensive consultants to come in and work on their surveys. Another thing that's advantageous about Survey Solutions is that it has export formats that are used by a lot of statisticians and economists. It exports data directly in SPSS or standard format with your labels and your variables and so on attached. One advantage that's relatively new in Survey Solutions is that it also has a web interviewing function, which we think will become more and more widespread adopted as internet access and so on becomes more widespread. The other tools like Open Data Kit are also free. They're a little bit more complicated to use, and also they don't have some of the case management features that Survey Solutions provides out of the box. There's another software on the market called Blaze, which I believe was developed by the Dutch National Statistical Office, but it's not free, and it's also not very user-friendly. So of the features that Survey Solutions has, here are a few of them that I thought might be interesting, especially for forestry. So it has georeferencing features, so we can easily take georeferences of holdings or any type of waypoint within the tablet. Also, we can import satellite imagery into the tablet, and we can draw polygons and things like that. And also, we can automate area measurement inside those polygons using Survey Solutions. The case management tools, which also screenshots of, are one of, I think, the most added value of Survey Solutions, because at any point in time, you can look and find exactly where a survey case is in that moment. Is it still out in the field? Does it contain errors? Has it been approved by the supervisor? Or not. Another thing that it does, it generates very detailed paradata. So you have, along with the microdata that you collect in your survey, you also have the time of day stamp for every action that's taken on the tablet during an interview. So for me, that's been particularly useful for two reasons. One is when you're analyzing the data, if you find kind of funny things going on in it, sometimes it helps to go back to the paradata and see exactly what the enumerator is doing on the tablet, and that can sometimes give you a sense of the source of the error. But also I use it particularly for monitoring my data collection. So for example, on a daily basis, I'll export the paradata and compute interview durations. This is a way of making quality control, for example. If you see that some interviews are going either way too long or way too short, then sometimes it's useful to follow up with the enumerator and find out why. It also exports DDI compliant metadata. So if your intention is to publish your microdata set afterward on a NATA platform, for example, with the IHSN or some other provider, DDI compliant metadata is automatically generated. The tablet application works on Android exclusively. I also consider this an advantage because Android is the most widely used operating system for tablet devices. So if you're going into a country implementing a survey, you will likely be able to procure locally a tablet that runs on Android. And also some of the work that Elias has mentioned on the development of the forestry modules, the community, and also the household modules, those are already programmed in Survey Solutions, thanks to Alberto's team at the World Bank. So now if you want to implement that module into a survey that you're implementing with Survey Solutions, it's very simple to take the module that's already programmed and implement it directly into your survey without having to reprogram it. So that's quite convenient. So this is an overview of how the system works. So in Survey Solutions, you have four main pieces to deal with. You have the Survey Designer, which is where you design your survey. You have Headquarters, which is sort of the centralized control of your survey. So the headquarters would, for example, be responsible for drawing the sample, developing the sampling strategy, and also distributing survey cases to supervisors or field teams. So the supervisor, in most cases I've been a part of in surveys, the supervisors travel with the survey teams in the field. Many times they drive, but they're also responsible for reviewing the questionnaires before they're submitted to headquarters. So they're sort of the first line of defense for quality control. And then at the bottom you have the interviewers. And the interviewers access the questionnaires and fill them out through an Android application. So I have a little animation to show how the workflow works. So first of all, the questionnaire is designed in the designer. The designer is available at the URL under the word designer. When the questionnaire is final and ready to go to the field, the headquarters imports the questionnaire into the headquarters instant, which is available at a URL as shown. That server can either be locally hosted by your institution, or it can also be, the World Bank offers a free cloud server that you can use. Then after the headquarters imports the questionnaire, headquarters creates the sample and distributes the survey cases to the supervisors. So in this case, the headquarters makes the decision, okay, I know that team 1 is going to EA numbers 1 through 5, say. Team 2 is going to EA 6 through 10, something like that. So the headquarters' job is to distribute the proper survey cases to the proper field teams. And this all happens electronically. When the headquarters creates the survey cases on the server, then the supervisors are able to access the server online at the same URL, sign in, and view the survey cases they've been assigned. So once the supervisor receives the survey cases, the supervisor must decide how to distribute those survey cases to the enumerators. So the supervisor needs to decide, okay, enumerator 1 goes to this household or this farm, and interviewer 2 goes to this one, and they distribute the survey cases accordingly. Now, the interviewers, they wake up in the morning, they open up their tablet, they synchronize it, and they can view the survey cases that they've been assigned. So then the interviewers go out into the field and conduct the interviews. Once the interviews are complete, the interviewers synchronize their tablets again, and they send the completed survey cases to the supervisor. At this point, the supervisor's role is to check the survey to make sure that it doesn't contain errors. If it does contain errors, the supervisor can reject the survey, sending it back to the interviewer to resolve the error with comments. There's a whole communication system also inside of this going on. Or they can accept the questionnaire as completed, not containing errors, and send it to headquarters for final approval. So with that, I would like to show a few screenshots of what this software looks like. So in the designer, anybody can create an account for free. You can do so right now. You go to the URL above, solutions.worldbank.org, and you can create, just with a simple email address and filling in a captcha, you can create an account, and you can sign in immediately. The questionnaire designer itself, the user interface is point and click. You have 2 panels, one on the left, which contains your list of questions, and one on the right, which shows you a form with different fields you need to fill in to define the questions. Of course, I was only given 10 minutes, so there's a lot of features in the designer that I could show you that I won't have time to show you. But a few things to note are that on the left, you have your list of questions, and then you might see some blue text there, which is a roster. So you have an implementation of a roster as well in Survey Solutions, of course. On the right, the fields you fill in, one that I think is interesting or useful is the variable label. So if you insert a variable label there, these will automatically be exported with your data set if you're going to be using SPSS or Stata to analyze your data. There's a field down there called enabling condition. You also have validation conditions, and this is how you implement skip patterns with CAPI and also cross checks. This is an example of a report that can be easily generated with Survey Solutions. So if you're doing, this is I think a survey I worked on. Yeah. So if you're georeferencing in your questionnaire, if you're georeferencing households or farms or whatever, you can display the georeferences on a map in the headquarters interface, which gives you a good sense of the progress of your survey. Okay, where are the enumeration teams going, and how many interviews have they been conducted in different parts of the countries? Another part of headquarters is the data export. So you have a data export tab on the top where you can export the data in whatever format you want, Stata, SPS, or tabular. If you collect pictures through your survey or sound, so any kind of binary file, you can export it here as well. You can create your DDI compliant metadata as well as paradata. So also, if you're handy in a programming language like R or some other, I would also mention that there's an open API for the database. So for myself, while monitoring surveys, rather than actually going into the interface of headquarters and exporting the data, I can access the database directly through an API in R. So that's also handy. The supervisor interface looks a lot like the headquarters interface. It just has less options because the supervisor has less privileges than headquarters. Here, this is an example of a report that a supervisor can see to see the status of his or her various cases. So you can see how many have been assigned to enumerators, how many have been completed, how many have been approved, and how many have been rejected. So it gives a quick snapshot of the progress of the survey, and it also allows the supervisor to better manage his or her work. The tablet application appears as so. On the left, you can see that there's a list type question where the enumerator has to enter a list of household members. So they just can type in the name and then go to the next field and type in another one. Below, you can see how a roster is presented. So rather than having a grid as you do on a traditional paper survey, you enter them linearly on a CAPI survey because the size of the screen mostly. So you would open up the household member's alley and you would fill in all the information about him. On the right, you have a screenshot of an example of when a piece of satellite imagery was imported into the tablet. And here we're measuring a plot by outlining the plot that you see on the screen, and the tablet automatically measures the area inside the polygon. Also, we have a mechanism in the tablet application to communicate errors to the respondent. So there are color codes. Red signifies that the tablet contains an error. This is a big help in improving your data quality, because since the enumerator can see immediately that the interview contains an error, he or she would know that the supervisor is going to reject it. So rather than arriving all the way to that point, they can correct it in the field immediately. Green signifies that everything is okay, that the section or question or whatever is completed, and green indicates that it's not yet complete, so there's answers missing. So finally, I would like to just provide some learning materials if you would like to learn more about survey solutions. So there's an e-learning course available from the Global Strategy with the URL at the top. There's a really good World Bank support site that has lots of tutorials on how to do different things in survey solutions. I gave a very quick presentation, but that has a lot of features that I was not able to go into, and there's a lot of really good tutorials and YouTube videos and so on how to take advantage of those features. And lastly, there's the survey designer right here, so if you're curious to try it out, you can make an account and start trying to work with it. And there's also available at this link is a detailed manual for the survey designer. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Serena Ferrari. I work with the Pastoralist Knowledge Hub of FAO. What I'm presenting today is a software for data collection called Open Forest Collect. It's a software we have been using within a project, the Pastoralist Driven Data Management System project called P4D project. What's this project about? We aim at improving the capacity of pastoralist organizations in collecting, managing and sharing information from among their communities. So we work directly with pastoralists, with extensive herders. We are conducting trainings with them. So far we have been working with Argentina, Chad and Mongolia. And since we work directly with beneficiaries, with the herders, we needed a software very user-friendly, very simple to use. That's why we chose this software, Open Forest Collect. It's a CAPI software developed by the Forestry Department of FAO. It's free and open source. It can be downloaded from the website or from Google Play Store. It's very user-friendly, very simple, it's multi-language, and the way the workflow works is almost the same as the one the survey solutions presented by Michael. And the data, the collected data, can be stocked on centralized servers or on Google Drive, on clouds like Google Drive, or on local hosts. How to work with the surveys with Open Forest? I repeat, it's very simple. Once it's downloaded from Google Play Store, an enumerator, an interviewer can open it. It looks like this. We are asked to choose a questionnaire. If we are already working with it, we have a list of questionnaires. We can pick one. This is just an example. This is a questionnaire we're using on pastoralism. This is how it looks like. We have the items and sub-items on the left, and the question developed in the center of the screen. How we can move into a survey? We can move through the left bar through the different questions. We can also go back and forward through the arrows buttons, and or we can also visualize the whole questionnaire through the entity table. Here, for example, we can visualize the data collected within one interview. With collect, we can have also validation errors and warnings. For example, here it is telling us that entering a country is mandatory, or on the right we are seeing that the number we entered is wrong. We can also have lists. For example, if we have to select an administrative unit, we can have the long list. For example, this is the questionnaire we are using for Mongolia. AIMAG is the Mongolian word for region. We can press, we can click there, and we will see the whole list of regions of Mongolia. And we can pick one. We can insert GPS coordinates just by clicking on Start GPS, and it will be entered automatically. We can also have this option, navigate to the expected location if we have to go to a specific spot. We can also upload images, either by taking pictures or by selecting images from the device's memory. Of course, we have text and numeric fields for simple questions. And once the interview is completed, what's next? We have now, from the enumerator, the interviewer point of view, we have two options. First option, we can export the data. In this case, we export the data. We can send it to via email, for example, to the survey manager, or store it in a cloud like Google Drive or in local hosts. The second option is submitting directly data. In this case, we have to create a centralized server. We did like this actually. We created a centralized server, so now within this survey we are stocking the data in the FAO website. And if you are very nice and kind, you can also ask my colleague Stefano to create one for you, or if you can do it by yourself, you can do it. And then you have to throw the tablet or the smartphone, depending on what you are using. You can enable the connection between this mobile device and the central server, going through the settings. You enable the connection, you enter the website address where you want to stock the data in, and you enter also the username of each enumerator and his password, and then you can submit the data directly to the central server just by clicking on Submit Data to Collect. Then we are asked to confirm. Okay, we can see that the data submitting is completed. And once the data collection operation is completed, what shall we do? We can manage all the data collected. So we go to this website address. It's the website of Open Forest, and we download Collect for desktop, not for mobile devices, but for desktop. We download it. This is the home page. Again, it's super user-friendly. On the left, we have many options. For example, let's see, the first option is the dashboard. On the dashboard, here is the phase when the enumerators had already submitted the data. Okay, so we have already some data. We can see the data collection process sorted by day or by month or by year. We can have like an overview. By clicking on data management, we can visualize the list of collected interviews, and they are, for example, sorted by visit date or by region or by collector. And we can enter into each of them just to visualize and verify the data collected. If we have, if the enumerators are not submitting the data, the interviews directly, but they are saving them on localhost or sending them by email, for example. We can take the interviews and import them by clicking on the import button, the yellow one. Then we can drop the file into this box. We will visualize, we will see the list of the interviews we are trying to import. Clicking on import, that's done. Or here, once the data collection operation is completed, is over, we can export the data by clicking on the export button. We can choose if we want to export them as Excel files or collect files. We click on export. And now, for example, here I chose the Excel option. And now the file is ready for analysis, and you can analyze it with the software you wish. I stop here, and I thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been given instructions to not exceed 10 minutes, so I will go as quickly as I can. My name is Rebecca Tavani. I'm a forestry officer within the NFM Red Plus team. I've been working at FAO as a forestry officer supporting national forest inventories for the last 10 years, and for the last 4 years working within the Red Plus team. Okay, so just a quick outline of the presentation. I'll give you a little bit of context. Secondly, why would we include socioeconomic questions within the NFI? Thirdly, the type of socioeconomic data that has been collected. Lessons learned and adapted approaches. And then the last point is applying those lessons learned and learning some more lessons, essentially. Okay, so we've all seen this slide, most of us. Our FAO support to forest monitoring, forest assessments goes way back. And of course, since 1946, there's been the Global Forest Resources Assessment as well. Support to national forest monitoring dates back to the 1960s, and where we've provided technical support. And in 2000, a new program was galvanized, created by FAO, with support from international experts to sort of make it easier to conduct national forest inventories. And the aim of this program was to strengthen national capacities, and it was always country demand driven. As I said, focus on capacity development. Cost efficiency was one of the main goals, participatory and could be sustainable, and fulfilled national and international reporting requirements. So the test was piloted firstly in Costa Rica, back in 2000, and then further rolled out in the Philippines, Cameroon, Guatemala, Lebanon, Zambia, so on and so forth. And this is important because both biophysical and socioeconomic questions were included, which is why I'm here today. Okay, so why collect socioeconomic data within national forest inventories? Because as we've heard, forests are about people. As Ilias had pointed out earlier, the forests, the biophysical information gives us an understanding of the supply side. The socioeconomic data gives us a better understanding about the demands on those forests. So if we want to have a better understanding of what's happening to the forests, it's best to collect this data. It provides us, and this is related, it provides us with a better understanding of the drivers of deforestation and forest degradation. It's cost efficient. The greatest cost of conducting a national forest inventory is just getting to the sampling unit. So adding on an additional questions related to socioeconomic is cost efficient when you consider the alternative of conducting an independent socioeconomic study. It can inform on the full value of forest ecosystems, providing information on the informal economy, for example. Impact monitoring it can help us understand the effectiveness of certain policy instruments. And of course, it can give us a richer analysis of the data when we can combine biophysical and socioeconomic. We look to see where, for example, perhaps access rights to fuel wood are not very clear, and we could perhaps correlate that, for example, with levels of deforestation that we see. Here, I just wanted to give a snapshot of the type of data that we have collected through history. And it first started with key informants and focus groups, and with time, we added a households component, and this was first rolled out in Zambia in 2008. So first we have key informants, and these are typically local people, local Forest Service officials, NGOs who have an understanding of the location, access. They can give an indication of access to the tract, background information. Then we also have focus groups, and this is general information on the land use, products that are harvested and used, and how any sort of conflicts in resource harvesting is access to those resources is noted. And then, as I said, with time, the household interview was added, and that's been conducted not just in Zambia, but in many of the other countries since 2010. And this is important for triangulation. This was suggested by one of our policy advisory boards to help us better trust our data that we're getting from the focus group. So a lot of that data is also a repeat of the questions that are asked in the households. But it goes further, and questions about livestock and agriculture are also asked there. So, take-homes and lessons. Okay, with this approach, it's obvious that biophysical design constrains the socioeconomic design. Of course, the two have different areas. In Zambia, for example, the biophysical tract is 1 square kilometer, and in many cases it was very difficult to find enough households within 1 square kilometer. So we had to go a radius, I think, of about 15 kilometers. So it's hard to then actually tie the two, the biophysical tract and the socioeconomic. So part of the solution would be could be conducting a separate socioeconomic survey that is more population-based rather than forest biomass-based. And/or modules could be carried out by the census bureaus who are already collecting population-based data. Secondly, the data is often owned by forestry departments who, quite frankly, don't know really what to do with the socioeconomic data. They do the bare minimum, and then that's it. And often this data is analyzed at the very end of the project, where there's not enough time to really compile and make certain that we're making those links to the biophysical data. So one of the suggestions here could be greater involvement or support by non-forest authorities, such as census bureaus, academia, in the design, implementation, and analyses. And again, the socioeconomic data is often carried out by forestry authorities, who are seen as police. And so this limits the objective replies that we get. So again, calls for greater involvement of non-forestry institutions. And despite overall cost efficiency, it also implies greater logistical and financial restraints. For example, in Zambia, it often took 5 days to conduct an inventory on just 1 sampling unit, and one of those 5 days was spent conducting the socioeconomic survey. So while it's cost efficient, it also has particular cost implications, especially if you're not optimizing that data, the use of that data. Often what we do is we conduct needs assessments, and many stakeholders are invited to these needs assessments, and we end up getting suggestions, everything but the kitchen sink. So this makes for very long questionnaires, which implies more days in the field, which implies greater costs. So it's very important to determine the utility of the collected data up front. What is the application of this data? What policies is it going to inform? So we've tried to do a better job of that through the years by first looking at exactly what are the policy needs, and then going from there, looking at what are the indicators for those policies, and then going from there saying what are the metrics that would inform those indicators. So, and then thirdly, rich data sets are created, but it's challenging to link the socioeconomic data to the biophysical results during the analyses, because the tract also with the population, the tract is seen as very abstract. And some of the solutions to this, some of the suggestions through the years of improving this would be to have a subset of the focus group discussion questions targeting only the tract area, taking the interviewees on a walk of the exact tract boundaries, using maps more to indicate exactly the location that is being referred to. It's also been suggested, and we've applied this in certain countries, to better utilize observations of the biophysical enumerators between plots, because there's a lot of walking that is done, and they could take advantage of observations regarding land use change. And also, women are sometimes reluctant within the forest, within the focus group discussions, to respond to the questions. And so there's a need for gender disaggregated surveys led by female enumerators. So in Zambia, there's been a number of countries where we've taken a different approach to socioeconomic interviewing. We've evolved over time. I'm just going to give you a snapshot of the ALUA 2, which stands for the Integrated Land Use Assessment Phase 2 in Zambia, which I was involved in. And this was a population-based survey designed and conducted not by the Forestry Department, but by Zambia's Central Statistics Office, the CSO. And both urban and rural populations were captured. It consisted of focus group discussions, male and female disaggregated, key informant interviews, and household interviews. It assessed the importance of forest products and services to livelihoods, food security, and energy was assessed, and accessibility to user rights and management of forest resources. And the data was owned by and processed by the Central Statistics Office with support from the Forestry Department and FAO. And there was a gender disaggregated approach here. The men and women were interviewed separately, and we made certain to have female enumerators lead those discussions. So some of the lessons learned on this population-based approach was that with this approach, you do have two institutions. So it makes it more complex, obviously. And it's best to have a data sharing agreement in place at the very onset of a project, because this is what we ran into in Zambia, was a lack of willingness to share the data. And it was harder, of course, to also analyze the data together. There's a need for this policy-driven information needs assessment approach, because the survey grew and grew and grew, and despite the best efforts to reduce, it was still rather long, and there's, of course, survey fatigue that's experienced. So shorter is better. We need to avoid the temptation to pile on the questions. A longer training period is needed. With a more complex approach, you need to have more days dedicated to training and making certain that the enumerators really understand the importance of disaggregating by gender, for example. We learned later that this wasn't applied in all of the sampling units because some of the enumerators thought this was optional. So this was not your average survey, which I think it was often treated as by the CSO. And there's a need for greater attention to peer review of the results and related dissemination. This was, again, an issue of not having enough time to actually spend on that. And lastly, I guess, the thought on sustainability is something like this, which cost $350,000, this separate socioeconomic study that happened alongside of the National Forest Inventory. Is that likely to be funded in the future? Is that likely to be repeated? So this is what we ended up asking ourselves at the very end. So some parting thoughts. It's always useful to include socioeconomic questions in national forest inventories. And they can serve as very valuable proxy data, and especially when budgets are very limited. But the expectations on the data used should be very clear from the get-go. It's qualitative data. However, if socioeconomic forest data is a high priority for a country, then embedding in an NFI is not optimal, it's not enough. And countries should rather explore integrating some of the forest-related socioeconomic indicators into more robust, institutionalized national platforms. And it's important to think long and hard about your objectives and tie them to policies, your budgets, the sustainability, and who is the strongest institution to carry this out, and of course, data sharing agreements. Okay, thank you for your attention. That's all.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Elias and the organizer for inviting me. I'm told I have half an hour, so I'll start my stopwatch now. Okay, Elias invited me. I'm with the World Bank Living Standard Measurement Study team, as was said at the beginning. Elias invited me, and in the program he wrote as a title, Opportunities for National Socio-economic Surveys in Forestry. I thought I would also touch upon some of the challenges, because yes, there are a lot of opportunities, but we're also facing a lot of challenges in implementing some of the work that we've been discussing in the session. So the background you have already had on where the collaboration between FAO and the World Bank on the developing of these guidelines for the collection of socioeconomic surveys comes from. So in terms both of the motivation, also the let's say the end product, which is in fact an intermediate product, this guidebook, this source book. So I will skip that. I've also included some other slides in the presentation in case Elias wants to share with the participants to have some more information. But I thought I would just provide some quick background on what the Living Standard Measurement Study, or LSMS, is and does. I mean, it's a program that has been active at the bank since the 1980s, and basically it's behind many of the numbers that you hear, the number of people living under $1 a day, and the living condition poverty statistics that many countries do are based on surveys of this sort. But our group is also involved not only in technical assistance, but also in research on the methodological development of instrument. And all the data are open access. So on the opportunities, well, the first opportunity is that there is been all the tools that we've been developing over the past few years that you heard some about in earlier presentations are there. That's of course it's a big opportunity. Some knowledge and some tools are out there for practitioners that we didn't have a few years ago. And they have been used. I mean, there is also, we're witnessing that there is demand for it. I mean, that's, Elias mentioned there's been one example that, of a national survey that went in the field in Turkey, even before we had finished that volume based on a draft of that work. And that's been replicated in Georgia, in Sao Tome. We actually included a small set of questions about I think it's about 15 questions in a larger household budget survey. So there is also opportunity to, when some of the constraints that Becky was mentioning are there, to also think about different approaches of how at least we can get a minimum core set of information for our analysis. In the field we have one survey in Armenia and one in Liberia, which actually the fieldwork just finished about a month ago, and data is being processed. We also have in advanced planning discussion one effort in Tunisia where FAO is also involved. I see Anne sitting there and Elias, they're also involved in this one. And I was saying, I mean, we have also tools to meet this growing demand. One is the National Socio-economic Survey in Forestry guidebook that Elias presented, and another one is the survey solution module that Michael alluded to. But also, as a companion to this, we're also finalizing a similar work on trees on farms. So, I mean, where also other information more on trees that grow on household farms can be collected, and that follows a study that was based on existing LSMS data that was published in Food Policy, and some of the lessons learned were used to develop a new module which is going to be published soon. But let's turn now to the challenges. One of the main challenges we find is that data is often an afterthought, right? Everybody wants data when they have to analyze something, but not many people are ready to put in money in data collection at the start. And oftentimes also when people want to evaluate their program when they're like towards the finish line, but they should have, I mean, it's much easier to do if you think about that process earlier in the program rather than when you're close to the end. One important also problem, and that I mean, Rebecca was alluding to the issue of sustainability, is the idea of bridging this gap between the forestry and the statistical community. So to me, I mean, the only approach to which we can achieve sustainability is if we work as much as possible through building sustainable data systems within the countries. And we have this problem of bridging different areas and different disciplines, both within our institutions, like forestry working with statistics, with being FAO, but within countries. So if nobody makes the case in the country, if the forestry department doesn't make a case with the National Statistical Office for that type of data collection, that is not just going to happen by itself. So how do we create this link? How do we work with for instance, with forestry department for them to lobby for the National Statistical Office to collect that data? And then also in the relationship between the international organization and countries. You guys probably talk to the forestry department, the statistics division, to the National Statistical Office, but rarely, and the same is true in the bank, rarely we go together and try to leverage this dialogue in the country. Another issue we're finding problems with because also at the bank we are trying to promote this type of approach to data collection with task team leaders in forestry projects, is to have people really appreciate the complexity and the costs that are associated with data collection. People often approach us with, okay, can I have a small, I really want to collect good income data, but I want a short survey. Okay? The two things don't go together. If you want good income data, you have to be prepared to go. I mean, if you ask income for one question, you may as well not ask it. There are other information you may want to collect. But the quality of the data, and that relates to the questionnaire implementation design, to the sampling, but also to the implementation of the survey. I mean, Michael has been talking a lot about data quality control. You can have exactly the same instrument, and the quality, the effort that you put in supervising and quality control in the field makes a whole lot of difference in the end product, in terms of data that you have. But so I think, okay, these are all difficult challenges. They require a lot of work and effort, but I think those are worth addressing because that's the only way we're going to, on the one hand, achieve the sustainability of these data collection efforts, and then also gain credibility and ownership by the country data. It's much easier to hire consultancy, go there, do your survey, get out, but then are the national authorities going to buy those results? Is that survey going to be done again in the future? If you work through the national data systems and make your survey part, or at least some of the information data collection part of the national statistical system, then it's much more likely that data collection will happen again. Okay, I have another minute. And so all these efforts, of course, have cost implications, and we go back to the initial point. So how do we fund this data collection? I mean, data are public goods, so everybody expects to get it, but nobody wants to pay for it. And Rebecca was mentioning we have a 350,000 survey. Okay, but a lot of times, I mean, that seems like a large sum if you put it that way, but it would be good also to relate it maybe to I don't know, multi-million-dollar investment projects. So what percentage, a lot of times half a percentage point of the investment program to data collection would pay you for a very, very good survey. But still, even that half percentage point is not put there. So we're trying to think also within the bank how to do more of this. One could be in, I don't know, in different facilities or different programs, have an ex-ante requirement that a certain percentage needs to go to data or something like that. So okay, it's 10 minutes now, I'll stop here. In the slides there is actually more on this project we just completed in Liberia, which I think is really the way this kind of project should work. There was a lot of buy-in from the national, from team at the bank, buy-in from the local institutions. Very complex questionnaires were done in all countries in the entire countries under very different difficult implementation circumstances, but on a national sample of 3,000 households, and with a clear link to both policy engagement and investment plans for the country. So data are going to come up over the next few months. Hopefully they're going to be good quality, and I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks for all the speakers. It's very the presentation is very rich and diverse interval of opinions. Let's open the floor for questions. But before the question, I see that the biggest challenge is the match of the observation unit. In forest inventory survey, we talk about tracks, we talk about standards, and then we're sampling it in that ways. But in household survey, socio-economic survey is household at a minimum, they are community or whatever. That is the biggest challenge, I think. So, questions? Do we have the speaker? Anyone? Yes.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations.
Speaker, tell us your name and a question to whom?
I'm Taylor Tondelli, and I work for the Forestry Department on gender-related issues. My question, I guess, would be directed towards you, Ilias, but I'm sure many of you on the panel would be able to answer. And it's regarding the way you disaggregate formal and informal work. I saw some of the questions within the matrix you put up on your presentation. We're asking about households, what kind of work they do, how forestry contributes to their livelihoods. But do you have some sort of standard of how you decipher formal from informal?
No, I think there is no criterion that differentiate between formal and informal. Basically, we collect the data, and sometimes what happens is like some of these informal transactions will be missed. So basically, we have to go in detail to collect that information. But there is the questionnaire. We don't necessarily differentiate between formal and informal. Is there anything, Albert, you want to add?
Okay, let's have 3 more questions and together, and then we can answer that. Yeah. Just go first. You're first, and then Andrew, and then sir.
Yeah, Peter Lehtonen from Forest Governance and Economics team. Thank you for good presentations. I have actually a very kind of fundamental question. Is that I think that for me it's quite important how this data and how these survey results are applied or will be applied to be more convincing. I mean, also like when you were mentioning that now how it will be sustainable and how to get the kind of next financing. So I think that maybe that's the next step, but we should have a little bit more evidence how important this data collection has been and how it has been assessed and how it has been utilized, why it's so useful. We just say it, but I don't know if you want to comment on that. It's clear. Thank you.
A couple more questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Andrew Tabor from the Social Forestry team here. And my question really is about, it was touched on, but only very peripherally, the links between socioeconomic data and biophysical data. What's happening in terms of the natural resources, the forests, the ecosystem services, and so on, upon which those systems depend. And I wondered if how you see those very different data sets can be better linked so that we can understand trends in sustainability in socioeconomic and biophysical terms. Thank you.
Yes, yes, please.
Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Ana Paula de la O. I'm with the SP3 management team, and looking more specifically about a process that we're doing here in the organization, looking at how much our work in FAO is focused on extreme poor. And this is very, very useful for our work because we, in fact, in this process, we haven't found any information about what the role of forestry is in poverty reduction because of the lack of data. And the SOFI this year launched a number, I can't remember exactly right now how the SOFO report cooked it, but they indicated that 40% of the rural extreme poor live in forests and savannas. Maybe Elias has more information on how that was done. But that was actually very useful. I mean, even if it's small, and going back to your question, why is this useful? This is a very interesting indication for the work of FAO because our poverty reduction work tends to focus a lot on crop agriculture, and we tend to neglect the work on forestry, especially for poverty reduction. So I think more information coming from the forestry, more linked to income generation and the role of forestry in the different, because within forestry there's also great diversity, across the different, let's say, types of households, And we know that some forestry activities are very, their incomes are coming from those activities are very low for some households, and other types of activities in forestry can be greater. So we need more information to inform how we can support the livelihoods of forestry-based communities more specifically. So I'm looking forward to the analysis that can come from these countries that are starting to integrate forestry incomes in the LSMS.
Which one of the panel want to address those three questions?
Can I just address
Yes, please.
this gentleman's point? I fully agree with you. I think it makes the most sense to start with the application of exactly how you wish to use this data, and I think that relates to Andrew's question as well about how we can better link biophysical with socioeconomic. I think if you start from just the data, it's really overwhelming. But if you know your questions going into it, it demystifies the analyses, and you can then know exactly what you're looking at. You're looking at, okay, rates of forest deforestation and forest degradation, and you can even combine ground data with also satellite data that tells you the trend there, and you can combine that with perhaps access rights and tenure rights and this sort of thing. So I think if we had better understanding, more targeted understanding of your questions up front, which is linked to policy instruments, government agendas, that would be very helpful. And I think that would streamline also the data analyses phase. And I fully agree with you too. Maybe the only addition that I would say is it is so important, and I wonder also about how we can better lobby governments to include just a few forest-related questions on livelihoods and income generation in their population censuses, to really first make the case about the contribution to GDP, and then if we had that locked into a standard census, it would really, really help. I understand that there are some countries that do that, Peru, for example, but I think if we can push that a little bit more, it would make it really much more sustainable than what we have right now.
Yeah, on the impact, I agree with what Rebecca said on the importance of starting from your question, your policy question, and so I will not reiterate that. In the LSMS program in general, for instance, on agriculture in Africa, we have this program that's called Integrated Service on Agriculture that's been going on for 10 years in Africa. And it started from after the food price crisis. People were trying to understand the impact of food price crisis, and there was basically little or no reliable data in Africa, and I don't know, data on yields in the same country for the same crops were all over the place, depending on who was collecting them. And so we started the program, and now the availability of data, I mean, we are in 8 countries, but covering half of the rural population in Africa. And we've seen the use of the data, both by governments and by the general, let's say, research community, increasing exponentially. So if you put good data, good quality data out there for public use, which is another important element, somebody referred to the need to have a good data sharing arrangement with the country when we do this sort of project. Data do get used. But also, yeah, of course, I mean, you don't go in a country and just collect data for the sake of it. I mean, the example of Liberia, I think it's a good one. It's aligned to a policy reform engagement, to the study of the reforms of forestry concessions and other things. So, I mean, the expectation there is that there is a demand going in the country for that type of data to answer some specific questions. And then the other, I mean, I'm not a forester, but coming into this dialogue at the beginning, we saw this mismatch between people who had been coming from this side of the story that were saying, they were very surprised that they thought that 25% of income from forests nationwide that some Penn network studies were showing, they consider it low. I mean, for us, it was pretty high. And so even for advocacy and for people who have their own priors on what's actually going on, there is a lot of stylized facts that people see differently. And putting some good, reliable data out there to advocate based on good data rather than on priors, it's also, I think, effective for a lot of our communities. What Ana Paula was referring to, I mean, even some basic information can help getting some important messages across. So there is different scales, I think, at which we can leverage these data.
Okay, I see a couple of hands raised up. No? Okay. It's, yes. Last round of question is 3 minutes past 1.
Thanks. I'm Ben Davis with the SP3 management team as well. I want to just reiterate 2 points which have been mentioned, but I don't think have been focused on enough, and that's the collection of data. It needs to be driven. It's not just that you have to think a bit about the questions before you collect the data. I mean, the data collection has to be driven by the questions and what you're going to analyze, because otherwise it's basically a waste of money, right? So, so I would just to make even stronger the point that Becky and Alberto were making, that it has to. If you don't have an idea of what you're going to analyze, so that's why the analysts have to be involved in the collection, not just the statisticians, not just the survey people. The analysts have to be in the formation of in the development of the questionnaire to make sure you're getting the data to answer the questions, just driving the whole process, right? So that's really the starting point for any kind of data collection. Otherwise, it's a waste of time, I think, and resources. The second is just to reiterate what Ana Paula said, in the sense that, I mean, myself as a researcher, I'm an agricultural economist. I've been using household survey data for years, looking at world populations. I've always basically ignored, for the most part, forest income, just because it isn't really there. It's poorly evaluated. And so my formation is to ignore the forest sector. Yet we know that, in fact, it is fundamental for the issue of, for many of the SDGs, and particularly SDGs 1 and 2. And so there really is an imperative to better collect and to do it systematically with the different institutions that are doing that. And so for us, it is, I mean, we're desperate in SP3 to get more information, whether it's on studies and individual studies, national studies, as well as more cross-country data. So for us, it's a fundamental.
My name is Maria Nutin, and I work for several teams here in Forestry. And just a quick comment in the monitoring of forest and landscape restoration. There has been a round figure of 10% to be invested in monitoring and evaluation of these projects, which is actually quite a lot higher than the half percentage you were mentioning. But I think some like a key, it would be important to get some recommendations. What kind of number has worked? And of course, it's such a diversity of projects, but this 10% might be a kind of one point to look at it. One thing I wanted to, from yesterday evening discussions actually with WFP colleagues who are collecting part of their data for estimate food insecurity and through remote sensing. I'm just wondering if there would be some opportunities to combine the data and the approaches that they're using, for example, the automated data analysis using artificial intelligence or other means. They seem to be moving fast on this front. Thanks.
Anyone from the panel? I take Ben's. I just basically 2 comments. If you have any feedback to Yunen's questions.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because also it gives me the opportunity to respond to the previous question, which I think failed to address. All the new, more recent LSMS data are georeferenced, so with georeference household, with georeference communities and plots. So there is a lot of opportunities there for integration, for using that information to integrate different data sources. And we are working with WFP, we're working with the European Space Agency, we're working with people in Stanford. I mean, this idea to, there is interest from both sides, from the household survey community to leverage more of the, let's say, remote sensing data, but also from agencies that collect satellite data to enhance the use of those data for socio-economic applications. So I think that there is a lot going on at the moment, and definitely it's moving fast, and definitely there is an opportunity to use this sort of data with that idea. And and something that is at the let's say intersection between the integration of different sources and the use of the data is the fact. I mean, one main feature of the LSMS data is that they are multi-topic. So they allow you to analyze not forestry in isolation, but a lot of times you cannot understand, I guess, I mean, this was the same in, for agricultural economics. We tended to focus on agriculture alone, and you couldn't really understand the decision of people, because, I mean, those same people who are doing agriculture, they're also engaged in other economic activities. So if you don't understand their constraints and opportunities outside of agriculture, then you cannot understand their decisions in agriculture. And I guess the same is true for forestry. So one side in which this data is particularly rich, it can allow you to explore and understand better what's going on within the forestry sector. Is this link with other outcomes and constraints.
Just to add that, yes, often within the household surveys attached to the NFI, the GPS coordinates are attached. We haven't taken advantage, I don't think, of this integration with geospatial data. So I think that's an area that our team, for example, could explore more. But it has to be definitely enhanced.
All right, thank you all very much. With 10 minutes after, I have to close it here. The panelists are willing to stay for a few minutes. If you have any burning questions, just come by. And give another round of applause to the speakers. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of the today.